Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast.
Today on the podcast, we have Gwendoly Espe, and Gwendoly is the product manager at Yaskawa Solectria Solar. And I think too, you have inverters that are made in the United States, right?
Yep. So we are Yaskawa Solectria Solar, and we are based out of Lawrence, Massachusetts. And then our parent company, Yaskawa America Inc., is based out of the greater Chicago area. So we're both American companies, and we make American products.
All right. Yeah. So yeah, Chicago and Massachusetts, those are places in America, folks. Still are. Yep. And nobody's taken it over yet.
Nope.
So let's see. So what have you been up to lately?
Yeah, so we are focusing on continuing to manufacture in U.S., mainly in Franklin, Wisconsin, and Buffalo Grove, Illinois. And our focus has been making bigger inverters. So we're currently working and developing on making an even larger inverter. But really our focus right now is DC coupled systems and sharing to our customers our DC coupled solution. And it's something that, especially in Illinois, has been quite popular. There's been a lot of incentives for PV plus storage products.
That's cool. And so maybe what we could do is just explain what DC coupled is. And one of the ways that I try to simplify it is just say, well, when you have that sunshine hitting those PV cells, you want to charge those battery cells, you're not converting to AC in the middle. So you're very pro DC coupling. Do you want to give me a better explanation and just kind of let us know why your solution is the best?
Yeah, so I like to do is start with explaining the difference between AC coupling and DC coupling, and that kind of paints a good picture of the differences. So AC coupling is a lot easier to start with, and it's combining two different sources of energy, and where they're being combined is what determines whether they're AC coupled or DC coupled. So for example, you might have a PV with a PV inverter, so it's going from DC to AC on an AC bus or the AC panel. And then on the same AC panel, you might have a battery with a battery inverter that's converting DC to AC onto that AC switchboard or panel. So that's AC coupling. Those two energy sources are being combined via AC. DC coupled, similar concept, two different energy sources. We have PV and batteries. Typically, that's what we're talking about. You have your PV and your batteries being coupled via DC. So it's all behind a single inverter. So the coupling is happening behind a single inverter.
Great. Okay. And so why is Yaskawa Solectria specializing in DC coupling?
Well, what we have found is that there's actually not a lot of great options out there for DC coupling. AC coupling, there's a ton of options. It's pretty saturated as far as products that are available. But for DC coupled, there aren't a lot of options, especially in the power range that we are in. I started out in the residential inverter company that did off-grid. There's quite a few in there. But once you get into the 250 kilowatt to 10 megawatts or 20 megawatts, especially I think around the 5 megawatt range AC, there's not a lot of options out there, especially American made. I think we're one of the only ones out there with that. So we're kind of in a nice size where that we fit into. And, one of the main benefits of DC coupled systems is that you're able to, like what you were saying before, PV inverter, you're exporting. So one of the things with just a regular PV system is that you tend to oversize your PV because it makes the most sense. The industry standard is like 1.1 to 1.3 when you're oversizing your PV array to what your inverter output is. And that's because there's seasons, right? So we have the summer where it's a lot of sun for a longer period of time. And then we have the winter, which we all love. Actually, I do like winter. I'm in Montana. There's a lot of skiing here. Yeah. There's less sun then. So you're trying to balance between maximum energy yield versus spending more money on modules. But the great thing about DC coupling is that when you are overproducing on those summer's days or the cold spring or fall days, usually the inverter clips that excess energy, whereas with DC coupled systems, you're able to divert that straight to the batteries instead of just losing that energy.
Yeah, so one of the ways that I've heard it is that your PV can charge the battery and it sends it over to that DC bus. And you can use an inverter that's connected to the grid that's a lot smaller than you otherwise would. So you might also have a problem with the utility only letting you put certain size of inverter and say, that's it, that's all you can put there. Or maybe it has to do with what bus bar you're connecting to. And so, yeah, you've got all that. And we use electricity 24 hours a day. The sun's out less than 24 hours a day, unless you're on the North or the South Pole. And so then you need to be able to store that energy and then use it later. So,
Yeah. And then you could also do other services as well overnight, like frequency response, or like the inverter helping with managing the grid's frequency to make sure it's in a stable area, which the inverters do a lot of fun grid support functions to help maintain the stability of the grid.
yeah, that's really exciting. And so your product too, so pretty much you have something that is like a charge controller charging the battery, going from the PV to the battery. And then you have inverters that go from DC over to AC. So are those separate? Are they in the same unit?
Yeah, I know in like residential, they're typically in one unit because they're pretty small. The product that we provide is what's called the PVS 500, and it comes on a rack with 3 inverters, a DC recombiner, which is the DC bus, and then an AC combiner box. And the DC-DC converter sits next to it. So it's a pretty large system. The DC to DC converter, or the charge controller, or the solar, the battery charger, that's like the size of like a commercial freezer. So it's pretty large. So that is not part of the inverter. It's separate, but it's part of the whole solution. And what's really interesting is I came from solar off-grid inverter company. And I think the typical topology there, at least in the past, has been PV to a solar charger. This is battery-based system, solar charger to a battery plus inverter. So the PV is directly connected to some type of solar charger, then charges the batteries. And this topology is a little bit different. It's PV to a DC bus. So the DC bus is PV voltage, whereas in residential, the DC bus was battery voltage. And this is getting way too technical, but
No, that's great. Yeah.
but it's interesting. Yeah. So the DC bus is now PV voltage, typically 1500 volts, very high voltage. And then the DC-DC converter or battery charger is in between now the battery and the DC bus. So the inverter still acts kind of like a PV inverter, whereas in residential, in the topology that I talked about, it kind of acts as a battery inverter. So like primarily, because you could do without the PV and it just becomes a battery charger discharger. And then you add the PV, you're actually DC coupling the PV to a kind of a battery inverter, if you want to say that. But it's just really interesting. There's different topologies for DC coupled systems, which is why I really love it.
Yeah.
Because it's a fun thing.
Yeah, and so I've heard it too be called reverse DC coupling and DC coupling. So you have to match the battery voltage to the PV voltage. And how are you going to match those voltages? Are you going to convert the battery voltage to make it match the PV voltage like what you're doing? Or are you going to convert the PV voltage to make it match the battery voltage? And so the way that you're doing it is everything is kind of running on the PV voltage. So you can use a regular PV inverter. And if you were doing everything to work on the battery voltage, I guess you would have something like a DC to DC converter doing maximum power point tracking on the PV that is converting it over to the battery voltage. And of course, all of these voltages are going to change because you're doing maximum power point tracking on the PV. You're trying to get the optimal voltage and current combination to get the most out of your PV. And you're going to have different voltages on your batteries depending on how fast you're charging them, how fast you're taking power out of them, what the temperatures of the batteries, a whole bunch of different factors. And then there's going to be the input of the inverter and what that voltage is.
Yeah. And I think the key there at this topology is you're really maximizing your PV array. You're not putting some converter before you get to the inverter that might throttle it or whatever. So it's giving full access of the PV array to the inverter or to the batteries.
We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast. And he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSEAN, that's solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show.
And so for these systems, like you said, they're larger. And so I know they're larger than, a little Outback inverter on your house, but for like typical off-grid type of thing, something like that. So how big are they? Are these used in commercial and industrial applications, like on big buildings, or are you putting them out there on acres of land?
Yeah, so these type of systems would have to be ground mounted since they're 1500 volts DC based. But technically you could do them in a commercial setting. I think we have one project that's like that where they just step it down. So our AC output 600 volts AC. So then they would have to have an additional transformer to step it down to 480 or whatever the voltage would have to be for that commercial site. But typically our solutions are for like community solar projects or small utility scale projects.
Do you hang out in Canada?
I mean, I have, yes.
Because their grid, instead of having 277, 480, they have 347, 600. So then you would need a transformer, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So I was wondering if it's a way of Canadians taking over our grid.
Yeah.
And then why do you pick 600 volts?
600 volts AC just makes power transmission a little bit more efficient. I think some of our competitors do 800 volts AC. And at the time that became a little bit popular, the balances system, the BOS, was really hard to procure at that voltage. So we've stuck with 600 volts AC, but the higher voltage, the more efficient the power transmission is.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you go up to 1500 volts, that would be like strings on a big, on an array on the ground. That's, typically the way a utility scale solar system is designed, because on the ground, your limit is 1500 volts, but that's cold temperature open circuit voltage. So maybe you're more like over 1000 volts or 1100 volts or something like that. And then when you slice and dice it, then you turn that into the AC electricity. Then what you're doing is you're going to reduce the voltage a bit. And so that would be why I think that 600 volts would be smarter than 480.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So very cool. And so it's also interesting too, how it's put together. And so you have a bunch of racks. And is it the same kind of rack as a server? Like, could you just go buy one?
No. It's like a steel frame, like a welded steel frame that holds on to that you mount 3 inverters. And our inverters, they're very close to our PV inverters, but they are a storage model because they have some extra features and functions to it to make it more friendly for DC coupled systems. But it's 3 inverters mounted on a huge rack. I don't know how many feet. It's like almost like a skid, but on a rack. And a DC combiner box. So it's somewhere where all the combiner boxes, all the PV can connect to, and then the DC converter or the batteries branch can connect to. And so if you could just imagine like a steel frame, it's not a container or enclosure, it's just steel frame where all the components are connected to or mounted to.
And so this is typically in front of the meter or behind the meter. So is it offsetting loads, or is it out there selling to the utility?
Out there selling to the utility, typically, yeah.
So there's kind of not any reason to configure it for, battery backup when the grid goes down.
You could, theoretically, yeah. The system like that could do that, but it would have to be in a controlled manner and make sure that because I think that becomes like a microgrid system, but I think there would have to be like extra controls and logic in place and relays to make sure you're isolating whatever you're trying to provide. But theoretically, yeah, you could do something like that.
Yeah. But with the utility scale solar, since you're not working with loads, you're just supplying the grid.
Yeah.
So what would be the point? I guess one point would be like, if you had a place where the grid went down every day, you could save up that power and then give it back to the grid later. But it just doesn't really make a lot of sense to configure energy storage system that's connected to the grid to be able to do backup if you don't have any loads to back up.
Yeah, I know. Like, I believe that outage at ERCOT was a few years ago. That was pretty.
Oh, in Texas, yeah.
Yes. I think they had a huge winter storm. I don't know if having like DERs distributed that could provide backup. with hardware that could isolate a local area would be helpful or not. But I think that's a whole different level of planning and making sure there's infrastructure for that. But today, yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, you're in the future, I think. So you were talking about distributed energy resources, DERs, so just like solar, storage, anything like that. And so, yeah, it would be really cool to be able to isolate a neighborhood, something like that. So you would cut the grid into sections, and then you could have backup, and you can make it work like that. And I just don't think that the utilities know how to do that. You'd have to be working with the utilities. And I shouldn't say they don't know how to do that, but they're not investing in it yet.
I haven't heard anything about that yet, but I'm talking theoretical.
Or I got an idea, though, perhaps. What about all these server farms that are popping up for all the AI and stuff?
Yeah, that has been a huge topic of discussion, and I'm actually not super familiar with the requirements for those things, but I do know that they do need a lot of energy. They are very interested in PV. They're very, very interested in PV plus storage and DC coupled systems because they can harvest even more. I've heard some things about also maybe having like DC loads, like direct DC loads to those data centers, similarly with maybe EV charging stations, things like that. But I can't speak to that actually a lot, but other than the things that I've heard or read about.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this is future stuff too. So one of the things that's happening is people are trying to build these data centers, and the local neighborhood is against it because they don't want their electricity prices to go up. So if you could have a big old solar and storage project where instead of taking from the grid, perhaps you're even adding to it to bring their electricity prices down, then maybe they could put their data center there.
Yeah.
But we're just getting way too far in the future right now.
We interrupt this podcast for a very important announcement. This podcast was brought to you by Magic Solar Crystals, turning sunlight into energy.
So let's see, how can people get their hands on some of your products?
Yeah, so they can email us at sales@solectria.com to learn more about our products and get connected with the sales manager and set up a meeting if you want to learn more about our PVS DC coupled systems. We also offer one of the differentiators that we do as well, which I think is really neat, is field serviceable inverters as well. So we back that up with our spare parts kit, and we also back that up with hands-on training, which is fantastic. It not only entails our training that we have it in Waukegan, in Illinois, and Lawrence, Massachusetts. It's a hands-on inverter training that not only goes over our inverters, but goes over actually communications as well. And like with Networks 101, you learn about IP addresses, static IPs, local networks, subnetworks, things like that. And because many issues in a commissioning that I've seen is communications based and trying to understand, hey, how do I get my data logger or my DOS to communicate with the inverters? How do I get them to talk to each other? How do I do that? So it's a really great training, and training is really important to us. We want to make sure that our customers are empowered and really understand our product. And it goes even beyond our product too. If you learn about networks, you could take that to another solution as well.
Yeah, it sounds like some kind of a training that would help people with all kinds of stuff, like just making your computer talk to your printer.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah. Once you go, you're like, oh, because, we talk about local networks at your home, and it really like clicks like, okay, now I think I understand how to do that. And once you leave our training, you'll know how to set a static IP. And if you need to connect to your printer at home, you'll know how to do that.
Great, great. Well, maybe you guys should put some of your classes on HeatSpring, and then we can do some classes together.
Yeah, it's NABCEP-accredited as well. So you get, I think, 16 hours. Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of hours. And then you can make your printer work. I'm going to send my mom because she needs some networking help.
Yeah. Yeah, 3 days, and then she'll be good to go. And she'll learn how to work on inverters.
Great, good. Well, that sounds pretty exciting what's going on there. Any other things that you want to talk about right now?
Yeah, so, part of our training is just trying to get people to understand our product or just in general the market. So we also started this webinar series called Recharge with Solectria. And we do this once every other month, the last Thursday of the month. The first month in January, we had Miles Russell. He did a fantastic one on FEOC, which I know is a huge hot topic right now.
So FEOC has to do with?
Foreign entity of concern. So it's new requirements that the federal government is imposing to make sure that components are not being manufactured by foreign entities of concern. And he talks about the different categories of that, the history of domestic content requirements all the way through FEOC. It's really great. And that's on demand. So you can find all our webinars if you want to sign up for one at solectria.com/trainings/webinars. And you'll find that one on demand on that webpage. You could watch it. It's really great. It's a lot too.
Great.
And it seems like it's a moving target sometimes.
Great. Well, if one of your colleagues would like to come on the podcast and talk about that kind of stuff too, I'd be interested talking about foreign entities of concern and all that. Sounds exciting.
Yeah.
You know, we could have like spies, and we can have inverters with little chips and cameras inside of them and microfilms. Do they still have microfilms?
I don't know. Yeah, that's another thing that always comes up too is, cybersecurity and wanting American-made products because of cybersecurity concerns as well, with little chips from, who knows where.
Mm-hmm. Well, pretty fascinating. All right. Thank you so much, Gwendoly Espe of Yaskawa Solectria Solar.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
And thanks for listening to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. To learn more about AC coupling, DC coupling, which one's better in which case, you got to go take some of my classes. Go to SolarSEAN.com. And if you want to get energy storage installation professional certified from NABCEP, you go to SolarSEAN.com/ESIP. That's ESIP. Ow!